little funny thing I wanted to talk about. I'm trying to get back onto this channel, trying to pad it out. I'm working on a lot of bigger projects, and I think quick side content out in between the bigger projects I'm currently working on. So remember when I said I had a big project in the works? Yeah, funny how that works out. With that, Our Friend Martin is a 1999 move film major motion pic glorified after school special. I don't really know how to classify Our Friend Martin, honestly. I mean, I suppose it does have the fundamentals of a movie. It has moving pictures, there's a plot that exists and moves events along, there's several characters and animation. Look, I can barely call this a film, and not even in a subjective way. It's been long debated how long films have to be considered a film versus a short film, with the most common consensus I've seen being anything over 40 is considered a actual full-fledged film. From the first opening logos to the beginning of the credits, Our Friend Martin is 58 minutes long, though I've also seen people say anything in the range from 41 to 61 minutes. This has to be the most inconsistent film time I've ever seen. What the fuck? Can you imagine if theaters and Netflix had their film times this variable and up in there? Oh, this film could be an hour and 45 minutes, or it could be 3 hours. We don't know. Oh, wait, they do. Though the animation is fine for what this is, being animated by Deke Entertainment, who are the guys behind the Super Mario Bros. Free cartoon and a lot of Sonic shows, there's not much I can say in praise of the rest. The plot is somehow bare bones, yet completely and utterly unhinged the more you think about it and ask questions. The characters are little more than soapboxes and megaphones wearing human skin suits, and the pacing is so breakneck that at a certain point, it's better not to have any vertebrae at all. And I already know what I'm going to hear, so yeah, I know it's really not that deep. I know I'm asking for a Tarantino from a glorified PSA. I know I'm kicking a defenseless horse corpse here. Look, it was either this or taking shots after Zootopia 2, which would end up with me taking shots from an Ours Last Zootopia mod and bleeding out in New York alleyway. And if I'm going to have that happen, I at least want some sort of legacy left behind. The movie begins with copyrighted music in the opening credits, which are in alphabetical order for whatever reason. I think this is the first film I've ever seen do this. Just why? Well, there's a reason I can imagine why it's not billing first, like quite literally every single other movie, but that's something we're gonna have to put a pin in and address
later.
The actual movie begins with a flash forward to the near end of the story, following our main character named Miles and a young Martin Luther King Jr. Martin tells Miles that everyone has their own destiny and he must follow his, for both Miles and his own sake, even as Miles attempts to warn him of what that destiny is. As past Martin walks off towards the burnt out remnants of his house, he passes Miles his watch. As Martin quickly grows up and becomes the one we all know, Miles attempts to intervene one last time, to no avail. And honestly, for the majority of this movie being what it is, this isn't a bad opening in a bottle, especially in the context of this film's distribution being mainly in schools, so the children watching would likely already know about his death and feel the stakes already being established. There's also something to be said for starting the story in the middle or ending. It establishes the stakes right off the bat and leaves the audience wondering just how the characters end up reaching the circumstances they are shown in. As a side, semi-related tangent, my high school English teacher actually did a similar thing with a book that isn't meant to be read that way, being John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, which angled the curriculum in a different way than if we had read it from point A to B. I don't know, figured it'd be an interesting anecdote to bring up while we were on the topic. Anyways, more copyrighted music plays during the title card. You're probably wondering why I keep awkwardly cutting around the opening credits, and like I said,
later.
As for the actual movie, no blue balling this time. We're back with Miles and Jesus Christ, this was what was considered middle upper class in the 90s?
I'm gonna make him give back our past.
We're back with Miles, who seems to live a fairly comfortable life with a PC, stereo, and some pet fish. Also, this shot with the PC is just genuinely kind of insane. Who just leaves their clothes on top of their computer? Around the room, sure, I'll grant you that. But on the computer, I think we might need to intervene soon, man. Some plot stuff happens, that's just about it. As Miles goes to his bus stop, accompanied by more copyrighted music, he's chased by his bully, whose name I can't even be bothered to remember, to be honest. If you've seen one Disney Channel or Nickelodeon show, you know just about the entire crux and arc of his character. There's a few shots where Miles is shown effortlessly getting away while the bully struggles due to his weight, and while I understand in the 90s and 2000s being anything more than skin and bones was considered morbidly obese, at least in the fashion world, it is funny having a special based on a man who said, hey, don't treat others by how they look, but by how their character is. Then turning around and making fun of a guy due to his appearance. I don't know. Maybe I'm becoming just a bit too woke. Bully man guy confronts Miles at the bus stop, but before he can beat the shit out of Miles, the bus driver arrives and Miles is dead. He is deceased. He can barely be called a corpse. He is a red smear on the floor. Forget about coffins. He's going to be buried as a cave painting. He has more in common with playground mulch than another human being now. The bus driver just killed a child and does not remotely care. Holy shit. You know, just as I mentioned cliffhanger openings that start in the middle of the story, there is also something to be said for having the balls to kill your main characters off, perceived or otherwise, also at the beginning of the story. It establishes even higher stakes than the cliffhanger openings do, as it shows nobody, not even the main characters, safe from the forces that lurk within. That, compounded with the fact that you may already know and sympathize with the character, can completely throw you off emotionally and cause you to ask questions such as, how did the characters get into this situation? Or if you happen to know they will be in more of the story due to trailers, how will they get out of this situation? You know, I really thought this was going to be bland and preachy, but I do have to admire the creative writing choice to kill Miles off this early in the story, especially in a PG film. Absolute cinema. Miles survives this, by the way. Dime store postal dude gets his shirt torn off by the bus, and we get a short scene of him being driven to school by his dad, where it's shown the apple does not fall far from the tree. At school, we're introduced to a few more characters, though they're about as one-note as the others we've met at this point. We have Randy, the best friend, Miss Clark, the teacher, and Maria, who's the pompous honor roll type. Though, given who she's forced to work with, I can't blame her. Miles gets lectured about his grades, and when he replies that he really only sees a future in baseball or entertainment, Miss Clark uses it as an opportunity to explain how MLK and the civil rights movements have given Miles the ability to go down any path he wants like anyone else. It's a scene that I think actually does its job well and I'm willing to give points for. Though I do find something odd about this entire plotline, and I should probably preface by saying I have no idea how the Atlanta school culture was in 1999, but there's this weird dissonance wherein despite living close enough to the MLK Museum to go there as a field trip and later actually skateboard there, Miles just does not seem to know anything in depth about MLK. Yeah, he has the basics, but the most minimal summary possible. Yes, I get this is for his character arc, but again, he lives in the same town as where MLK did. Would his school not have a month minimum? Again, considering this is the same town where MLK is from, and it's literally MLK Middle School. Cut to the MLK museum situated in his old house. Whereas Miles and Randy play with MLK's old baseball glove, they're suddenly transported back to the past with some of the most effects I've ever seen. Suppose I can't really give them shit for it though. It was the same year as Toy Story 2, and obviously Deke Entertainment isn't not using Pixar budget here. The boys are transported back to 1941, where World War II rages on, movie tickets were 21 cents, and long before the Civil Rights Movement was even a thought. They meet a much younger MLK, though for simplicity's sake we'll call the younger MLKs Martin, and the older ones, namely right before he dies, MLK. Martin is playing with some friends who are white, and Miles and Randy join in. It all goes well until the mother of the boys arrives, telling them to get away from Martin and Miles. Miles talks back, but given this is 1941, it resonates about as well as that you'd expect it would. As the mother walks away, she says,
The only hanging you'll be doing with them is from a tree.
After Martin goes back to his father's car, the boys are teleported to a few years later in 1944. They meet up with Martin in a train car, and while the boys obviously remember Martin, given that they just saw him seconds earlier, Martin does not remember them. Those left ambiguous whether it's due to time travel fuckery, such as their appearance having not been quote-unquote canon, another thing we will put a pin in for later, called as thread number 2, or given the fact that Martin saw them only once 3 years beforehand. And before you say anything, do you remember the name of the person you met once 3 years ago? A DoorDash driver, a person who verified your movie tickets? Exactly. Martin catches him up on what his life had been like in the meantime, and eventually the conductor comes by asking for tickets, and telling Randy he should join up back up with the White's train car. When Miles asks about this, a video of real instances of segregation shows up as Martin replies, which actually serves as a solid way to show the reality of what segregation was like, even in this semi-fictional context. It's a sequence that only happens a few times in the film, but I feel as though its sparse occurrences add onto it. Eventually, Martin invites the boys to his house, and as they eat, his father speaks up and
What are your friends going to do while we make our rounds later?
wait, hang on, pause here. I just have to make sure of something. Is that James Earl Jones? So you remember all that lead up of me saying later. Well, here we are. The cast of this movie is genuinely scarily stacked. Like we're talking as stacked as your usual Marvel or Illumination film. On top of the fact that Dexter King, one of MLK's sons, voiced him in a later part of the movie, we have actors and actresses such as Jaleel White, Ed Asner, Danny Glover, Whoopi Goldberg, John Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, Oprah Winfrey, and Frank Welker. And of course, as I mentioned, James Earl Jones. It's even crazier when you think about the position some of these guys were in during the time the movie came out. Sure, Jaleel White was probably an easy grab considering he had been in a few of Deke's Sonic shows at this point, with Sonic Underground actively airing at this time, but this was only a few years after Pulp Fiction for John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson, and of course also a few years after The Lion King and a decade or so after Star Wars for James Earl Jones. Which begs the question, where the fuck does this movie's money go to? If you look at the soundtrack, it gets even more absurd, with artists such as the Jackson 5, Marvin Gaye, and Stevie Wonder. Again, you have to take in mind, this was direct to DVD, no theatrical release, and from what I understand, almost exclusively distributed in schools, which only lends me to ask again, where the fuck did they get their budget from? Was this a money laundering scheme? I genuinely have to wonder who signed on for a much smaller check than usual, and who actively tried to haggle who I can only assume was Deke into a higher payment. God, Hollywood accounting is such a weird thing. Anything about Hollywood legal stuff, really. Remember when The Rock just straight up lied about how many tickets Black Adam sold?
Cecil! I need you, Cecil!
I'm kidding, Dwayne. I love you, and I'm definitely not saying that because I'm like 120 pounds on a good day. Please don't kill me. The boys travel further in time twice more. There's not really much to say in these scenes, except I'm pretty sure this is the only time Samuel L. Jackson actually shows up, which makes it even funnier. The boys land back into the present, or well, 1999, and the next day watch video footage of one of these events being the Birmingham riot in 1963. Only reason I actively mention this scene and not skim over it as I previously did as well is because fucking Hills and Randy just appear in this real life footage, which brings up two questions, one being less insane than the other. Number 1. The classic question of what is actually considered live action, at least in the POV of the boys. Are they diegetically live action and somehow ended up in what they see as a cartoon recreation? Is it all live action to them? All cartoony? Number 2, what is considered the canon of their time travel adventures? As indicated both here and in part of the plot later on, all alterations the boys make stay in the quote-unquote canon and alters the timeline appropriately. But also somehow the future versions of Martin don't know who these boys are. Yes, we are getting that fucking deep into this. Like, at the very least, I can excuse the first time with Martin on the train because it had been like 3 years and Martin was a kid, but I feel like by the second time in the ministry, he should be able to know, especially considering they're literally wearing the same outfits. So are they canon to the timeline or not? See, this is why you have to be careful writing time travel shit, because one small branch, one small strand off the plot, and your entire system just collapses like Pompeii. Now suspicious of the two, Maria and the fucking kid from back in the barnyard, who both have been relevant in nearly 20 minutes, follow both the boys back to MLK's house. As it's happening, Miles almost dies again because of the bus driver, but thanks to the divine blessing of plot armor, manages to make it. The four are transported back to the March on Washington. After some plot shit, archival footage of the I Have a Dream speech plays. As much as I'd just love to play this for you, the audio for it and all of Martin's other speeches are muted throughout the movie. Now you're probably wondering, that's odd, why is that? And consequently, who owns the speeches now? And you may just want to sit down for this one. Fucking DreamWorks Pictures. Yes, that DreamWorks Pictures. The same guys who did Madagascar, Shrek, Trolls, and have nearly closed their doors like 3 times. That DreamWorks Pictures. Several fascinating videos on that latter subject, by the way. I'll make sure to link them below. In a deal penned in 2009, DreamWorks bought the film rights to MLK's speeches and at least partial rights to MLK's life story for his biopic Steven Spielberg was making. For some reason, the Vice article about it states it was full rights, but considering Selma was released in December 2014 and was filmed in April of that year, I can't imagine it was full life rights, unless they managed to get away with it by saying it was a story about the march specifically instead. Again, Hollywood legal stuff, don't question it. Because of this, movies both at Universal and Warner Bros. About MLK were canceled and the quotes in Selma had to be adjusted. Haven't watched it since 10th grade history class, and I barely remember 10th grade history class, but from what I understand, they were just heavily adjusted and paraphrased instead of entirely new speeches. 17 years later, and there's been quite literally zero progress. I'm glad a UFO movie means more to you than some of the most important speeches in all of history. Good job, Spielberg. You get a gold star. Which is to say that every single real-life speech in this movie is completely muted. Obviously, considering how long the speech actually is, and with the fact that it's muted, nothing really happens in the scene aside from the fact Miss Clark was apparently at the March on Washington and supportive. Back in the present, they find out MLK gets assassinated and proceeds to go back to save him. They teleport back to 1941, tell Martin how important he'll turn out to be, which I'm pretty sure is the second most important thing you're meant not to do in time travel, aside from killing your parents, and they establish Maria has a crush on past Martin for some reason. I don't know, man. I wasn't the guy who made this movie. Yeah. They end up getting Martin to go along with them, but the future ends up being changed far from where they came from. Martin's house is burned down to its foundation, and Randy and Bling Bling Boy are now racist, and the bus driver now drives normally. I don't think that's sunk in enough, so I'll say it twice. This movie heavily implies, if not outright states, that the bus driver only drives erratically because the civil rights movement happened. Holy fucking shit. When they reach the school, the principal tells Miles off for drinking at a whites only fountain, and it's meant to be played up as this big dramatic moment like seeing Randy be racist, but we literally never see this character throughout the movie. Like, not even in the background of the school scenes. Again, I'm not asking for a Tarantino here, but I'm pretty sure the fundamentals for a twist, even a minor one, is that you're meant to be used to the status quo, to how things are, before the twist. After some more scenes of people trying to kick them out of school, they come across Maria, who now only exclusively speaks Spanish and is a maid for a living. This is probably the best and only real possible time to mention that if you Google this movie and go to images, Maria is among the top results. And not just Maria, straight up Maria Ramirez, her full name. This movie is testing me, man. Tested on both our regular and incognito tab, by the way. The charitable interpretation is that some girl somewhere looks up to her as a role model and looks at her picture every day. The realistic interpretation, it's one I don't really want to think about, to be honest. The principal uses Randy and Bully Boy to force Miles and Martin out of school. The two retreat back to Miles' house, where the house is now a shell of its former self. Miles' mother reveals that rather being an office worker, as she was in the intro, she is now a maid, and the family is severely impoverished. As Miles and Martin have a sleepover, Martin ponders on his true purpose, which leads us back to the opening scene. Miles and Martin sit in front of Martin's burned out house, and after a blatantly obvious Lion King homage, including having James Earl Jones stating what his character's son has to do, Martin walks through the door of his house, and as he ages properly into MLK, we see him on the balcony of the hotel where he would be shot, and sure enough. Okay, look, I know what I'm about to say is like the antithesis of this whole time travel plotline, but what's stopping Miles from going back to the day of MLK's death, or even like a few hours before, and just, grabbing him from then? It's fucked up, but I feel like all things considered, if it were MLK just vanishing instead of dying, things probably wouldn't change that much. Like, yeah, it fucked up massively the first time, but I feel like if you took him from a time from when the foundations of the civil rights movement were at least on solid ground, you'd probably have a lot better results than the first time. And for that matter, I don't care if it's MLK or Gandhi or whoever. I feel like if you implied to any 11-year-old that going through a certain portal would lead to their death, they'd probably want to find some other way around it too. After another muted speech, Miles is back in the museum. The message of the movie is stated. Miles becomes a grade A student, and the movie ends with a compilation of both the animated characters and real life people helping the local communities to the tune of Marvin Gaye's Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Finn. So that was our friend Martin. Is it possible to get Stockholm Syndrome from a movie? It's probably because I've watched this whole thing 4 times over. Once during MLK Day when I was in school, which probably shouldn't count since I was over a decade ago. Once for the review of my Discord. Join the Discord and follow my Twitch, by the way. I promise this is the only plug I'm going to have here. I even wait for them to do it. And then also so I could write the script, not even to mention how I've had to bounce around this movie for editing purposes. Which is to say that, yeah, there's not really much I can't say that hasn't already been said in that review and in the intro. The script is bland, the characters' arcs are the most generic shit ever, the time travel makes no sense, and if we do operate on its rules, the movie could actively be solved for the better using its own rules. There's holes in the script that leave crazy implications when you think about them. Yet, I cannot say I hate this movie for better or worse. There are plenty of movies I've seen I utterly despise, and this isn't one of them. The animation is actually pretty decent, especially for this being from a low-budget cartoon company. The premise, while having been done before, is an interesting hook that the movie serves well. Several of the sentimental scenes are actually played up pretty well, and above all else, whenever I look at posts related to this movie, whether it's a Reddit discussion or another YouTube review, the comments share an abundant end. They saw this film in school, and they liked it. Loved it even. Knowing how many kids have likely seen this film, there's a chance much higher than zero that this film inspired someone to do good, even if subconsciously, and who am I to deny that? Art, whether in painting, writing, or film, is a beautiful thing, even for projects that I don't like. So long as another live being wasn't harmed for it, I do believe that peace should exist. It's something I've been struggling with internally ever since I started being a quote-unquote critic, and especially as I've been wanting to transfer it to video. How to mix the jabs and jests while making sure to highlight the positives. Perhaps that is also one of the great questions of life that's unsolvable. And perhaps I failed on that front with this video. Collapsed. If so, feel free to let me know in the comments on that or other ways this video failed and faltered. Or, in turn, let me know what you liked, what you loved, and I'll find a way to hit that aspect. Double or nothing. Want to make this a consistent series celebrating one of my favorite art forms, and in time, turn my eyes towards some of my other favorite art forms as well. Video games, writing, you know. Got a long hit list of films, and I can only hope you'll want to come along with me for it. And hey, who knows where that'll take us? 4 out of 10.